From President Biden's first primetime address to the nation, marking 1 year of the coronavirus pandemic and the historic relief bill he signed into law just a little while ago. Millions of Americans are now set to receive checks of up to $1,400. The White House says people who get direct deposits could see the money in their accounts as early as this weekend. The president, meanwhile, needing to walk a fine line tonight, celebrating progress toward beating the virus and improving the economy, while at the same time being very mindful that some 1,500 Americans are still dying of COVID-19 every day. Also tonight, new CDC data suggests that the past year was the deadliest year in U.S. history. The death toll now surpassing 530,000, with nearly 30 million confirmed cases over the past year here in the United States. 1 year ago, there were 1,100 confirmed infections on this day, and few, if any of us, could have imagined the illness and the suffering that was about to take place. Let's go to our chief White House correspondent, Caitlin Collins, right now. Caitlin, this is a huge, very important night for President Biden. What can we expect?
Well, he's been preparing for it for about a week now, according to his aides, who say he has been going through this speech line by line, not only because he wants to strike that balance that you were talking about earlier, talking about coronavirus fatigue that's happening inside the country, while also still talking about those 1,500 deaths that are still happening every single day. They also say he wants to properly convey what this $1.9 trillion coronavirus relief bill that he just signed a few hours ago is actually going to mean for Americans. It's this big, massive, complex bill, so they want to make sure he's talking about how it is going to benefit those lower and middle income Americans that they say he intended to look out for in this bill. And of course, Wolf, this all comes as he signed this bill earlier today, earlier than expected.
Got it. Thank you all. Appreciate it.
With that signature, Joe Biden sealing a defining moment of his presidency today.
This historic legislation is about rebuilding the backbone of this country and giving people in this nation, working people, middle-class folks, people who built the country, a fighting chance.
Biden signed the $1.9 trillion coronavirus relief bill a day earlier than expected, and the White House now says eligible Americans will start receiving stimulus checks within days.
People can expect to start seeing direct deposits hit their bank accounts as early as this weekend.
Next, President Biden, Vice President Harris, and their spouses will crisscross the country to tout their first major piece of legislation.
It was important to the president to visit not just blue states, but also red states, purple states.
But first, Biden will address the nation in prime time tonight to mark the anniversary of the coronavirus crisis, still killing almost 1,500 Americans per day.
He also wants to provide a sense of hope and what's possible if we abide by the guidelines, if when you have access to a vaccine, you get the vaccine, what people can look forward to.
Biden's speech coming exactly 1 year to the day after this one.
The vast majority of Americans, the risk is very, very low.
Biden has tied his coronavirus relief bill to a return to normal, and the White House will host a signing ceremony tomorrow that no Republicans were invited to, given no Republicans voted for it.
The American people already built a parade that's been marching toward victory. Democrats just want to sprint in front of the parade and claim credit.
One Republican Senator, Roger Wicker of Mississippi, even touted money in the bill for independent restaurant owners without mentioning he voted against it. What is President Biden's response to those Republicans like Senator Wicker?
Well, we invite them to work with us on the agenda moving forward, because clearly the bill that the president just signed into law is something that the American people are excited about.
Meanwhile, in an effort to address vaccine hesitancy in the U.S., all living former presidents and first ladies appeared in a new public service announcement urging Americans to get vaccinated.
This vaccine means hope. It will protect you and those you love from this dangerous and deadly disease.
You know what I'm really looking forward to is going to opening day in Texas Ranger Stadium with a full stadium.
All former presidents participated, that is, except one. Donald and Melania Trump quietly received the vaccine before leaving the White House in January, but did not use the opportunity to convince their supporters to join them. Now, Wolf, this is a day of several major moments for the Biden administration because in addition to signing that coronavirus legislation earlier and that big speech he has coming up in just a few hours, also his Attorney General, Merrick Garland, was sworn in today at the Justice Department. You saw him there earlier getting sworn in by Vice President Harris. He is now officially in that job, of course, after a very long path it took him to get there. And so this is another moment where Biden is adding more and more cabinet nominees and getting them confirmed. And they really said that's going to be the next step of their focus now that they've gotten this relief bill signed.
All right, Caitlin, thank you very much. And I want you to stand by because you're going to be joining us. But right now, I want to go to Capitol Hill. Our chief congressional correspondent, Manu Raju, is joining us. You've been talking, Manu, to Democrats about the hurdles ahead now that the COVID relief bill has been passed, signed into law by the president. What are you hearing?
Yeah, big clash coming between House and Senate Democrats and a slog over getting the next phase of Biden's agenda through. After the party was united and got this bill through in a quick pace and kept almost complete Democratic unanimity in both chambers, that is not going to be the case with a number of key measures going forward. And already today, you're seeing signs of tension. In the House, they passed two bills today that would expand background checks on firearms sales, gun sales, a big priority for Democrats for a long time. But they have a math problem in the United States Senate. They do not have 60 votes to advance that package because even though they have 50 Democrats and a handful of Republicans are almost certain to join them, they don't have the 60 votes that are needed to overcome any Republican filibuster. And there is not the support among Democrats right now to gut the filibuster rules and allow that measure to pass on a simple majority basis because of opposition from senators like Joe Manchin. So those bills like that will stall. And also big ticket items, climate change, immigration, infrastructure. There are key disputes over policy areas and also questions about whether they can keep their party unified, even win over Republicans on those measures. So, Wolf, even as they're celebrating this historic legislative accomplishment today, there's a lot of expectation that the next chapter will be longer, slower, and more divisive. And as one Democrat, Jerry Connolly of Virginia, told me today, he said, I think there's a real risk of a political letdown if they can't get it through the Senate. He says he sees, quote, frustration in our future.
All right, very interesting. All right, Manu, thank you very much. I want to bring back Caitlin Collins, along with CNN senior political correspondent Abby Phillip and CNN political analyst Maggie Haberman, the Washington correspondent for the New York Times. Abby, President Biden signed this massive relief bill into law today. Our new CNN poll shows that altogether, 2/3 of Americans right now have confidence in President Biden's ability to lead the country out of this pandemic. How significant is this moment right now for the Biden presidency?
It's incredibly significant because so much of the Biden presidency does hinge on his handling of the pandemic, his handling of the economy, especially as it relates to the pandemic. And it seems that voters are responding to what has already happened positively. He is by far best rated on the issue of handling the pandemic. And now with this COVID relief bill, there's an opportunity here for Joe Biden to say that no matter what happened in terms of Republicans voting for or against this bill in Washington, I delivered for you. And I don't know a politician in America who doesn't want to say to their voters that they were able to deliver $1,400 checks to them. And that's what Joe Biden is going to be able to say tonight. It's the key to everything else that's going to come potentially for the next 4 years of his presidency.
Yeah, Maggie, according to the public opinion polls, this bill is very popular. The White House says Americans will start seeing their stimulus checks as soon as this weekend. Are Republicans going to have to struggle to counter this with their own messaging?
Well, it's a great question, and I think you have seen Republicans struggling with how to address it. There has been a fair amount of questioning of why are Republicans staying so quiet in relation to this bill, and the answer is, as Abby said, it's popular with voters, and voters are really hurting right now. This is not a minor piece of legislation. It's a major piece of legislation. Following a pandemic, people are hearing that they can get immediate relief of, by the way, the total amount after the stimulus that was done under President Trump and this bill, or the relief bill, it will be $2,000 that people are getting. And that was the same figure that former President Trump pitched. So Republicans, I think, are waiting to see how this plays out. I don't think they know yet how they're going to message against something that ultimately most voters support.
Yeah, and Caitlin, President Biden no doubt will tout this bill in his primetime speech later tonight. How does he avoid, though, that mission accomplished moment?
Well, they do want to avoid that. And that's why you heard Kate Bedingfield, the White House communications director, earlier on CNN saying that this is not going to be a victory lap for President Biden tonight, because they do recognize this is a pandemic that's still happening. Yes, he signed this bill today, but no one has actually gotten these checks yet. And so there are still questions about the jobless benefits, when those are actually going to go into effect, if there will be any kind of a lapse given the way that states process those. So I think that what they recognize behind the scenes is, yes, this is a big accomplishment today for President Biden to actually sign this bill, but implementing a bill of this size and this scope is also going to be a challenge. And so that's really what they're facing next. And one thing we should note that we're still waiting to hear is who's going to be overseeing how this bill is being put into effect, because they did say yesterday they're going to pick someone to really implement and oversee this. They haven't announced who that is yet, but they obviously do realize that's going to be a massive task for someone to handle.
Massive indeed. You know, Abby, what sort of tone do you expect we will hear tonight from the president?
Well, I think President Biden, while he's going to try to avoid a mission accomplished moment, he is going to try to usher in this feeling that this is the beginning, potentially, of the end of this long national nightmare for this country. People are desperate for some sense of hope. We are approaching spring in a lot of parts of the country. And it's an opportunity for Biden, really, to say that we are on the verge of something really good for America, where we can have this virus under control, people can get back to work, kids can get back to school. It's the forward-looking part of this that I think he's going to be very focused on. Now that so much of what he has promised hinged on the ability to get this COVID relief bill passed, now is the time for Biden to say, we have that component of the puzzle. Now it's about execution, so that I can make good on all the rest of those promises. If he's able to do that, it won't be mission accomplished. It'll be what Americans are really looking for, which is a sense of hope that things are about to get better for them.
Yep, that's important. You know, Maggie, for now the second day in a row, the Dow Jones Industrial average closed at an all-time new record high. You see 32,485, up 188 points. The market, Wall Street, Maggie, is clearly happy with what they're seeing. Contrast that to what former President Trump used to say, his predictions during the campaign. Listen to this.
This election is a choice between a crippling depression or a historic boom. It is. You have a depression. All that money, all those 401ks, they're going to go right down the tubes, throw it out.
If they got in, they would collapse it. You'll have a crash, the likes of which you've never seen before. Your stocks, your 401ks. Does anybody have a 401k? Because you can just throw it right out the window if that happens. This election is a choice between a Trump super recovery and a Biden super depression. They will collapse our economy and send our nation into a very steep depression. There's a possibility if Biden wins, you're going to have a stock market collapse, the likes of which you've never had.
All right, Maggie, what do you make of that?
Well, there was also a possibility that that wasn't going to happen, that there wouldn't be a stock market collapse. Indeed, that is what happened. It is doing very well. As you say, Wall Street is responding very favorably to how President Biden is doing, and that's not a surprise. We saw repeatedly, even when the economy was doing well under former President Trump, that Wall Street did not react well to his moments of erratic behavior. It did not react well to moments when he was handling the COVID crisis poorly. I think that it is problematic for a President Trump who is trying to run again in 2024 potentially. If it were today, I think he would declare he is running, that he wants to frame this as the economy was only good under me. There are questions about whether the current relief bill will add to increase inflation. Time will tell. Not everyone agrees, but in the immediate term, there's just no sign of this apocalypse that former President Trump predicted coming into play.
Clearly, Wall Street thinks things are moving in the right direction right now. Guys, thank you very, very much. Just ahead, as Derek Chauvin's getting closer and closer to President Biden's first primetime address to the nation, 8 p.m. Eastern later tonight. We'll, of course, have live coverage. There's a lot for him to discuss 1 year into the pandemic, including the nearly $2 trillion relief bill he signed into law today. Joining us now, Senator Chris Murphy, Democrat of Connecticut. Senator, thank you so much for joining us. We know the president wants to project optimism tonight, but the virus, as you know, and as all of our viewers know, is still killing around 1,500 Americans every day. What does the president need to say tonight to keep Americans committed to fight against this pandemic?
Well, that's exactly right, Wolf. This is still a deadly virus. I went down to the Senate floor and talked about how, right now there are about 3 times as many people dying from COVID-19 as there were last March when we passed the first major relief act, which is why it was so wild to so many of us that Republicans who, lined up to support relief a year ago were absent from our attempts to try to deliver relief this time around. Yes, the president's got to display a sense of optimism. That's easy for him. He's somebody who conveys optimism naturally. But we can't turn this corner if people rely on only the vaccine. Remember, there's going to be a percentage of the population that won't get the vaccine. We're going to ramp up, but for the next month or so, there's still going to be a lot of people who are exposed. So we've got to still social distance, wear masks. That won't be the case for the rest of our lives, but we've got to be vigilant. And the president's got to, show the way out while also making sure that everybody understands they've got a role to play.
Yeah, so important. You've heard all the criticism from your Republican colleagues about the COVID relief bill that the president signed into law today. Some say it's simply too expensive, that it has way too much spending, which isn't even related to COVID. Will Congress have a role in overseeing the execution of the new law to make sure the money actually reaches the people who need it the most without going to waste?
What's wild, just on that first point, this complaint that it's too expensive, what's wild is that yesterday Republicans in the Senate unveiled a repeal of the estate tax, which would help 0.02% of Americans. Would be a $77 billion windfall to the Bezos family. And so Republicans are very willing to, engage in very expensive items when it helps the super wealthy. This bill delivers its relief to poor Americans and middle class Americans. And yes, Congress is going to be engaged in oversight. Yes, we're going to work with the states to make sure they spend the money in the right way. We actually designed the state and local assistance so that it goes out in tranches, meaning states have to sort of prove that they're spending it according to the guidelines. But Republican complaints that it's too much money is just kind of laughable, given that they're willing to spend trillions of dollars in tax giveaways to corporations and millionaires. But when it comes to relief for poor people, they're not so interested in spending money.
The Senate also is looking ahead, as you and I know, to a major infrastructure development, new legislation on that front. But Senator Joe Manchin, he's a Democrat, he certainly is a key swing vote. He was a key swing vote for the COVID relief bill. He says he won't let Democrats go it alone this time around. What is it going to take to bring some Republicans on board and get this infrastructure legislation going?
Well, listen, I am all for passing bipartisan legislation, but I'll be honest, my constituents don't really care how legislation that helps their lives gets passed. They just want it passed. We have bridges that were built in the Grover Cleveland administration in my state. We have highways that badly need repair. And so, they just want it to get done. They want us to put people to work rebuilding America's infrastructure. So I'm all for trying to get bipartisan buy-in for anything we pass. But in the end, process doesn't matter to the American people. In the end, the American people want to see us get stuff done. So on infrastructure, let's try to engage with Republicans. Let's try to get their support. But let's keep in mind that the voters decided that they wanted to put Democrats in charge of the White House, the House, and the Senate, in part because they didn't want gridlock. They actually wanted us to produce results.
So important that infrastructure. Tonight, as the nation marks 1 full year of the coronavirus pandemic, the progress we're making against the virus is tempered by the enormity of what we have lost. The U.S. death toll surpassing 530,000 tonight as cases near 30 million here in the United States. Let's bring in our national correspondent, Erica Hill. She's joining us right now. Erica, we now have CDC data that gives us very disturbing perspective on this past year.
Yeah, it does, especially when we think about the number of lives lost, Wolf. So we have early data from the CDC, which shows that 2020 was the deadliest year for this country in more than 100 years. In fact, that's largely due, perhaps not surprisingly, to COVID-19. The U.S. death rate increased by 15% last year because of the pandemic.
All right, we've got breaking news. The NBA has just announced that the season is going to be suspended.
The NBA coming to a screeching halt just hours after this warning.
Bottom line, it's going to get worse.
I said that, but I did not in my mind think that much worse was going to be 525,000 deaths.
And yet, here we are. In the course of a year, more than 29 million confirmed cases in the U.S., 530,000 lives lost.
Grieving in isolation is a very difficult thing.
CDC Director Dr. Rochelle Walensky calling the toll of the past year heartbreaking. We are tired, we are lonely, we are impatient, she writes in a new statement, while also focusing on hope. Both deaths and average new cases down in the last week. 10% of the population spread.
It means that not just you're protected from getting sick, but you're also protected from potentially catching it and then spreading it to others.
The same studies show it's also highly effective against the variant first identified in the UK, which is the dominant variant in Israel and which has been confirmed in all but 3 U.S. states.
This is coming at us at the very same time we're opening up America as if there's nothing else happening.
The Texas Attorney General suing Austin officials for keeping the city's mask mandate in place, saying it undercuts reopening efforts.
The science and the data are very clear that the single most important thing we can all be doing at this point is wearing masks.
And yet, from Maryland to Oklahoma, more states are easing restrictions.
The standard for normal cannot be 0 cases. In Oklahoma, the standard for normal is freedom,
prompting celebration and concern.
We just learned today that New York State will no longer require a mandatory quarantine for domestic travelers beginning April 1st, though those rules will still be in place for international travelers. The governor saying this is not an all clear, that New Yorkers need to remain vigilant. Just a note, Wolf, a little bit closer to you in Maryland, those mandatory quarantines for out-of-state travelers are lifted tomorrow.
Erica Hill reporting from New York for us. Erica, thank you very much. We're right now getting new information about President Biden's address to the nation. That's an hour and a half from now. Let's go back to our chief White House correspondent, Caitlin Collins. Caitlin, you're getting new information. This is important. What are you learning?
Yeah, Wolf, earlier the press secretary said there was going to be news in this speech from President Biden tonight, and now we're finding out what exactly that's going to be. And one thing that he is going to say tonight when he does address the nation here just in a few hours from now, President Biden is going to say that he is directing all states, tribes, and territories to make all Americans eligible to get the vaccine no later, they say, than May 1st. And that means that those conditions on age, other health conditions you may have that qualify you for the vaccine right now, they want all of those to fall away by May 1st, meaning every American can go and get a vaccine by then. They say that President Biden has the authority to direct states to do this through the Health and Human Services Department, and they say he will use that if he does need to. So they are encouraging all states to do that right now. And of course, Wolf, the question of what that's going to pave the way for, what they believe it could, is to have small gatherings by July 4th, by Independence Day celebrations that, of course, did not happen last year. So many of them canceled as we were just learning about the pandemic. They're hoping they can start to have life look a little bit closer to normal by then if Americans do get the vaccine. And that is one thing that a senior administration official who was really briefing reporters earlier was talking about, saying that a lot of this is not just what the administration is doing, but making sure that Americans are going out and actually getting the vaccine once they are eligible. Because a thing that they stressed is that May 1 deadline, that they want to have states drop away all of those conditions to get a vaccine. They said that doesn't mean everyone is going to get one by May 1st, but that means that you will be able to go get one. You could qualify for one. And of course, that is going to have to be something that people are then seeking out. But those are two critical dates that you're going to hear President Biden mentioned tonight, the May 1st and July 4th, when they are hoping life can look a little bit more like normal.
That is so encouraging. Let's hope it works out. Caitlin, these two dates, as you say, May 1st, July 4th, what is President Biden changing to get closer and closer to normal by then?
So one thing they're going to change, for example, is, of course, not only talking about ramping up vaccine production, as we've seen them talk about, but actually who can give the vaccine. They say that they are going to be opening that up to dentists, to veterinarians, other health professionals that can actually give these vaccines and administer them, because that has been something that the U.S. has struggled with, not just getting the vaccines, but actually having people to give them to people who are qualified to do so. So that's one thing they're going to open up. They also say by the beginning of May, or you're going to hear President Biden say this tonight, night, they're going to launch a federally supported website where you can go and look to where you can actually get a vaccine in your area. And they say for people who don't have internet, they're going to set up a call system where if you don't have Wi-Fi at your house, you can call and find out where the nearest location is toward you to get a vaccine. So look for measures like that. Wolf, of course, they also talked about something that has been on everyone's mind. That's opening schools. They said they're going to use money from that package plan that you saw President Biden sign earlier today to increase testing inside schools, talk about genome sequencing so we can find those variants that people have been talking about, learn more about them before they actually start to spread in the U.S. So those are the measures you are going to see President Biden announce here shortly. But of course, it is those 2 dates that everyone is going to be talking about for the next several days.
Certainly is. Very encouraging. Stand by. I'm going to get back to you. Right now, I want to bring in Dr. Richard Besser, the former acting director of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Dr. Besser, thanks so much for joining us. So what's your reaction to the breaking news that President Biden will direct states to open vaccine eligibility to all adults by May 1st?
You know, Wolf, I find that exciting, but you know what I find more exciting was the follow-up question in terms of what are they going to be able to do to ensure that everyone has access? And the idea that there could be something as simple as a phone number that people call to find out where to get vaccines. One of the challenges so far has been that there have been very high numbers of people getting vaccinated each day, but major disparities in terms of vaccination rates for Black and Latino Americans. And if you open the floodgates so that everyone can get vaccinated, but you're not bringing vaccine into community, you would expect to see those disparities widen. So it really needs to be that two part of having enough vaccine and ensuring that vaccine is getting to people and the systems are easy for people to access so that they know where to go to get their shots.
Yeah, that's really important. The president, we're told, will also tout the ability for Americans to have small gatherings for the 4th of July. Does that timeline seem viable to you?
I think it does. You know, if there truly is enough vaccine for every adult in America who wants to be vaccinated to get a vaccine, then yeah, 4th of July will look different. The only challenge here, and we have to keep it in mind, is that there won't be vaccines for children. And so you would hope to see that the continued trend of the pandemic is going down. If it's not, if there's still 50,000 cases of COVID a day, then you might be able to have a gathering, but it's gonna need to be a different kind of gathering, one with masks and still ensuring some social distancing so that children are protected as well.
Well, clearly there's going to be some important news in President Biden's speech that's coming up shortly. Thank you very much, Dr. Besser, for your expertise. We are always grateful to you. There's more breaking news we're following. Amazing. Tonight, Prince William is pushing back at one of the most explosive allegations made by his brother Harry and sister-in-law Meghan during their tell-all interview. Let's go to London. CNN's Salma Abdulaziz is joining us right now. Salma, Prince William spoke out for the first time about the claim of racism. Tell us about that.
They were brief comments, Wolf, but before you take a look, I want you to understand that this is a real departure from protocol. Statements from the family are almost always orchestrated. Take a look.
Sir, have you spoken to your brother since the interview?
No, I haven't spoken yet, but I will do.
And can you just let me know, is the royal family a racist family, sir?
Yeah, we're very much not a racist family.
Now, I think what anti-racism activists will tell you, Wolf, is that Prince William is missing the point and that journalist asking the question is missing the point. Because what Prince Harry and Meghan Markle were talking about was much larger than a single act of racism, than a single allegation of an isolated incident of racism. Of course, there is an allegation there that needs to be explored by the palace. But what the couple were speaking about was a system, an institution, a larger structure where there is racism entrenched in it. That was the allegation. And they were asking for a larger conversation, not just about the members of the royal family, but about the entire staff, courtiers, advisors, and not just the people, but you're also talking about traditions, protocols that date back to colonialism. I was speaking to one anti-racism activist who told me, I am tired of explaining the ABCs and the 1, 2, 3s of racism. People need to start to educate themselves on what Meghan Markle and Prince Harry were talking about. They were talking about larger structures of racism in Britain and how we can begin to tackle them and address them at a time like this. So this whodunit, who is the racist, it's not enough. Black Britons want to have a bigger conversation than that, Wolf.
They certainly do. All right, Salma, thank you very much. Salma Abdelaziz in London for us. Thank you for that. I want to bring in the journalist and former British talk show host Trisha Goddard. Trisha, you heard the response from Prince William. He said, we're very much not a racist family. Were you surprised to hear him speak out?
Well, I was surprised at the stupidity of the question. I mean, we train journalists not to ask close questions. And Inzamam Rashid from Sky News asked the question, what was he meant to say? Yes, we are. And I absolutely agree with that comment. When I'm talking about racism in Britain, I try to avoid the term systematic or institutional racism because I don't actually think it's well understood. You can talk about it in the United States because slavery happened on this soil. You still have issues like redlining and the busing of students that many people alive can still remember. Britain doesn't have that, remember. Their slavery was done overseas, out of sight. So there absolutely needs to be an education, especially amongst journalists and the media.
What did you think of the Prince's response to the question? You didn't like the question, but what did you think of the response?
I thought that it was more telling the way in which he said it. It was very terse. I think both of them was very terse, and it is a departure from normal protocol. And also, he was with a black teacher at a school, and they were there to talk about restarting after COVID, the mental health charity that they've got and program they've got for primary school children. So it was a really awkward situation. He's asked by a journalist of colour with a black head teacher nearby, and it's in a primary school. So I think his response, I don't think he could have won whatever he said. He had no way out.
As you know, Tricia, this is not just about the family proper, but also the institution around the family,
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah, and it's embedded, it goes back centuries. It'll take, it's a bit like that saying, having a dinosaur in an elevator. It's going to take a long time to turn it around. And one flip question is not going to sort things out. And absolutely, there needs not to be a witch hunt about who said what. That's missing the point. It's how do we change this ancient, this monument, this whole situation? And it's going to be a very slow process. But we need to see change rather than have statements put out about, yes, we are willing to change.
Do you think this moment of reckoning about systemic racism will actually lead to positive and lasting changes within the monarchy and indeed across the UK?
I sincerely hope so. I mean, there's been movement, as you know, with the Society of Editors, with Ian Sinclair stepping down after he refuted Meghan Markle's claims about racism in the newspapers. And the fact that 160 journalists of colour stood up and said, actually, you're talking rubbish, and that editors of certain newspapers refused to go along with that statement. Charlene White is a television presenter, and I know her. And she's a black woman who they took on board to help judge these awards, the press awards. And she has stepped down. She said, you know what? I came on board because you actually, the Society of Editors, newspapers actually said, gave lip service to wanting to change. And she said nothing has. So she stepped down. So let's hope this is a beginning right across the board.
Trisha Goddard, thank you very much for joining us.